Thank you for joining us on the pair program for us. This is another bonus episode of a mini series that we call How We Hatch. So today we've got Feross Aboukhadijeh. Feross is the CEO and one of the co-founders behind Socket, a developer-first security platform aimed at protecting companies from software supply chain attacks. And many of our listeners who are developers in the open source community will recognize Feross as one of the original authors and maintainers of WebTorrent. Feross, I'm excited to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us on the pod.
Yeah, great to be here, Tim.
Good stuff. All right, let's jump in. I always like to start every one of these episodes with kind of a more thought-provoking question. What did Feross have for breakfast this morning?
That's funny. My mom came over yesterday and made some food, so I had her leftovers for breakfast.
Solid. And where's home? Where are you calling out of?
I'm in San Francisco. I'm in the Mission District.
Very cool. Awesome. All right, now in true kind of how we hatched form, before we get into the interesting tech behind Socket, I'd like to learn a little bit more about the journey of the entrepreneur behind the business. So why don't you tell me a little bit about your background and what kind of led you down the path to get into the field of software engineering?
Yeah, I mean, if we can go way back, right? I've always been interested in computers. I've always, from an early age, kind of been drawn to technical things. My mom likes to tell this story about me watching the adults when I was like maybe a year old, watching people put the VCR tapes into the VCR, and so I'd always go over with my blocks and I'd stick the blocks in the VCR and try to kind of copy what they were doing. So the VCR was always jammed full of blocks and no one could ever get the tapes and they'd have to kind of like shake it to empty it out of all the stuff I'd put in there. So I've always been like drawn to that, like paying attention to that from an early age. And then, kind of in, I think it was middle school, I got into learning how to make websites, learning HTML and just kind of some basic web stuff. And that's kind of when, in high school, I started learning like an actual programming language because I wanted to build a website, and I wanted to. It was basically a way to collect all the games and Flash animations that I found online. And Flash is this really old technology. People might not even remember it, depending on how young they are, your listeners. But it was kind of like what people used to make videos on the web before YouTube existed. You kind of make these little animated videos. It was kind of some good memes back then too, like early internet memes. And I wanted to collect kind of all my favorites onto a single website. So I learned how to program in order to do that. And then I've kind of always been interested ever since then. Studied computer science in college. And what made me want to do that was I just realized with, that website I built that one of the beautiful things about the web and, technology is that you can basically build something once and it can go on the web and it's running there 24 hours a day. You could be sleeping and your website is serving people. They're coming there, they're using your site. You're getting whatever ad revenue or whatever, however, you can make money from that. And there's something about, this idea of like, you write this code once and then it kind of like runs while you're sleeping, kind of doing your bidding for you, right? That was so cool about it. And then also the idea that everyone is kind of, I don't want to, how you say it, like kind of like equal or on equal footing on the web. Like my website was up there, right there with Google in the sense that, you could type in google.com or you could type in, my website, url.com, right? And there's no barriers to entry. Like you can just put something up there and anyone can find it. And it can go viral. It can reach everybody, it can reach the whole world. There's something also really cool about that idea. So I just got like really excited by all that and just wanted to go deep.
Yeah, I agree, man. It's something powerful about creating something that is openly accessible around the global, around the world. And appreciate the nostalgia on Flash and VCRs as well. For folks who don't understand VCRs, they used to hold video right before that of a DVD. But good stuff. So so it sounds like you just kind of had this knack for tinkering and enjoyed the open web. And so, sounds like software development was almost, you were kind of destined to fall into the field. Where did you end up going to school? And talk to me about how you decided what what you wanted to study, and kind of a little bit more about that journey through university.
Yeah. Well, I mean, computer science was a natural choice. I went to Stanford, which is in the SF Bay Area. There's a lot of focus on startups there. It's not something I'd say is like common, but it's something that if you want to do it, you're not crazy. Like, it's an obvious presence of that on campus, and so I always had that in the back of my mind. Like, one day I'll do a company, and I'll be able to kind of just try to create something new, and kind of like what I did during college that kind of was fun and kind of led me toward ultimately Socket in the end, was kind of I got really into attending hackathons. I think I organized a few as well while I was there. There's a programming club that we had on campus called the ACM, and what was so fun about those was you basically got a chance in 24 hours to build something that could, what I found was what was the most exciting was when you could build something that surprised people, like delighted them in some way, that when they look at that, they go, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was possible, that you could do that with computers. So something that just kind of breaks their expectations. And what's cool about, well, what I, looking back, what's so interesting about that, that the fact that fascinated me is that that's not too different than kind of what a good security or like a good hacker has in their mind too. Is they're always trying to understand, what the written rules of the system say, and then what the actual rules of the system are, because there's often a difference between that. And when you find a place where, like, hey, the rules say that it's supposed to work like this, but actually it works like something else, that's often a hack, or that's often a vulnerability, or that's when you find something surprising about like the way that something works. And so if you can identify those, if you have, and that's kind of what I think the hackathon kind of mentality did for me, at least, is it got me kind of, I was like trying to just how does this work? Can I do something surprising with this? Can I do something with something unexpected with this technology that surprises people? And so I kind of did some fun projects during college that were kind of in a security vein. I did this one project where you could actually turn on a user's webcam without them expecting it.
It's dangerous.
Speaking of Adobe Flash, actually, it was a bug in Flash, and so I ended up reporting that to them, and they got it fixed. But it was
a big problem. Yeah, it's a big problem.
Not a good thing.
Not a good look. That's cool.
Also, yeah, that's kind of some of the interests I have with security, and then kind of hacking on stuff.
Yeah, and obviously, startups, have gained in popularity over the years. The Silicon Valley series, I think, was a part of that. Played a little bit of a part of that. But as far as jumping into serving as an entrepreneur, because I navigated your journey. You did a couple of internships with obviously some big tech firms like Meta and Quora. But you first started your first company, looks like Peer CDN. What gave you that itch to do your own thing? And then the other part of that question is, most folks that go into the internship program with big tech end up going down that path, but you kind of deviated from that journey. Is there a trend of entrepreneurship in your family? And what kind of gave you the excitement and that know how to take some risk to start your own thing up?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say there's entrepreneurship necessarily of like a business kind, but in my family. But my dad did come to America from another country when he was college aged, and he came here to study. And there's a bit of that kind of immigrant hustler mentality that you just get with growing up with a parent who kind of made the leap to kind of come to America from a foreign land and learn
it's like
the language.
Ultimate entrepreneurial journey right there.
Yeah, exactly. So I give a lot of credit to my dad. And then, but also I think, like I said, the college environment I was in, there was a lot of people kind of starting companies, and it was something that wasn't weird to want to do. And so, and I don't think that I don't think you need to be like super prepared to try. Like, I think you learn a lot more by just doing it. And the first company turned out to be, didn't really, it's not working out. It didn't work out as well as as Socket is going right now. But like, I learned way more doing it than I would have if I had just kind of read a bunch of books and been like, oh, I'm not ready yet. I need to kind of learn more things first before trying. I give you a perfect example. When we started that company, I had, like I mentioned, I'd been always kind of interested in doing surprising things with technology, and that was the basis for PeerCDN, which was kind of this idea that, hey, just like how Uber's the biggest taxi company in the world, even though they don't own a single car, can we be the biggest content delivery network in the world, helping people serve their websites fast and quickly without owning a single server anywhere or even renting a server by actually just using our visitors to random visitors on the web using their computers. So it's something kind of like a BitTorrent type of an idea where you get all these computers working together. And it's actually funny you mentioned Silicon Valley. It's not too different from the Pied Piper kind of, vision as well. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the idea for the company. And, let me tell you, it's not a good business compared to, how they made it look in the TV series. I don't recommend it because peer-to-peer just has a whole bunch of challenges just from like a, reliability and performance perspective. It's more suited honestly for things like torrenting, where there's some kind of like legal reason why you want to be using that type of technology. It's often challenging to deploy in like a real production environment where you need reliability. And so yeah, it turned out it wasn't a great business, but I learned some really good lessons from doing that, including the importance of talking to customers and really buyers before you go and build a bunch of stuff. If you're trying to turn it into a business, if you don't care that you're working on a science project, then you can, right, do whatever you want. But if you want it to be a business, you got to make sure that you're actually solving a real problem.
Yeah. Gathering that user research, it's something that we see, particularly with like technical founders, that maybe it's, they're a little reserved or, just kind of, sometimes that's a sales mentality or somebody that's going right out and talking to those customers, gathering those pain points, and then going back and, solving for that problem. I've seen that be an area that you might have a little bit more resistance with folks that just want to kind of build and kind of be behind the scenes and not really be as client facing, if you will. But that's interesting feedback. And I'm sure that plays into some things that you did, as we get down the path to more on the Socket journey. But continuing on the path, right? So it was acquired by Yahoo.
That's right. Yeah, Yahoo bought PeerCDN. We were a small team, just 3 people, and so it was an acquisition. We got a chance to kind of join their team and work with the video team there and build out kind of a new version of their video player.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a cool project. Cool, especially because we were so young, right out of college, and we had only really worked on that, on PeerCDN for like, it was less than a year, I think, maybe 8 months total. And so to be able to be like, go through an acquisition and learn what that was like, it was really fun, actually. I had a great time through the whole thing.
And probably a good boost to your confidence, right? And also being able to kind of see that life cycle of a startup that early on is to your advantage of what goes into, an acquisition per se. But kind of reading the writing on the wall, you were there for just about a year at Yahoo post acquisition, and then it wasn't shortly after that you were jumping down some paths within the open source community. So talk to me a little bit about that love for open source, and I think you kind of maybe got in when things were really heating up across the open source community. So that timeline, maybe that 2013 to 2016 timeline. Talk to me a little bit about one, like, how are you just kind of putting food on the table for yourself, but also, the career path that you kind of foresaw during this stint of the next few years?
Yeah. Oh, great question. I think the way I got into open source was mostly a reaction to what it was like to work at a big company. And, while I'm proud of the things we did at Yahoo, there were some obvious downsides to working at a large company like that. So the thing that bothered me the most about the kind of experience there was just the fact that they didn't use the technology that they acquired from us. And that happens a lot in these small acquisitions. And it's something that founders should definitely think about.
Was it just to buy to kill it, or is that what the case was, or what?
No, I think that they had some idea that they could use our technology to improve the kind of cost, and they just knew that they lacked video capabilities, like for their kind of video technology, and they thought we could boost it for them. But then in the end, they had bigger problems than what our technology was designed to address, and we needed to go and fix those first. So I wanted to kind of work on that similar problems again, but in a way that it couldn't get bought or shut down. It could just be a service to the whole world forever, And one of the things that's great about open source is that, I kind of think of it like philanthropy. It's, you're giving your time and you're giving your work product away to the whole world. And it's like contributing to Wikipedia. It's like you're just putting this thing out there and not requiring anyone to pay you to use it. And you don't know where it's going to go. It can be remixed, reused, integrated into other products. All this great stuff can happen when you put it out there as open source. And so I loved the idea of working on that, on that kind of problem space again. So I started WebTorrent, and the goal was basically to take the BitTorrent protocol, so the way that you get this peer-to-peer file transfer with BitTorrent, and to make it work in the web browser, so that anyone can just visit a website. They don't have to install anything on their computer. It's not complicated. They can just go, and it's a really simple experience, and they can start kind of participating in this peer-to-peer file sharing experience. And so that's how I got in. But then while I was working on that, I kind of really got addicted to the open source community and into the whole kind of phenomenon that was going on at that time. And you're totally right. Like 2013, 2014, that was such a special time to be in open source, specifically the JavaScript community, the Node.js community. There were just so many things happening then. It was so exciting. There was just a really high concentration of talented people that were building out the whole kind of the core abstractions in that ecosystem. And to be able to be like part of that and go to some of the conferences and meet people there was super fun. So I loved it. I look back on it as some of the best times in my life, being able to travel to these conferences and sometimes as a speaker, sometimes just attending, but being able to kind of hang out with all these really smart open source people was like just super fun. And to your point about like, how did I make money? How did I survive? Like the answer to that is being frugal. Open source is not a thing that you get into because you want to make money.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't set out with an idea for how you're going to commercialize what you're doing, which is, I did not set out with the kind of a commercial intent. You can tell by the types of projects I worked on that are not very easily commercializable, that, I just was in it for the love, not because I had some, some idea down the line for how I'd turn it into a company. So yeah, and that's kind of why toward the end of the open source time, I got really interested in funding models for open source and how can we make it so that you don't have to be like a self-sacrificial person to get into open source and be willing to kind of forgo, the salary you could make at a company in order to do this full time. And how can we get to a place where kids might even be able to say when they grow up, they want to be an open source maintainer as a job, as a real possibility.
Right.
And so I tried a bunch of different experiments to sort of do funding, and we can get into that if you're interested. But it turns out it's really hard. It's really, really hard to get people to pay for something when you put it on the internet for free.
For free, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
That's what I learned.
Yeah, I mean, there was one point, just kind of looking at LinkedIn anyways, and, you were doing a lot of consulting, like an open source consultant for Brave. And I was like, maybe that's how, he was kind of, fronting a decent chunk of, I guess, your revenue or your compensation while you were just kind of contributing to some of these other projects. Was that kind of part of that, or?
Yeah, I'd say finding a company that uses your code and then helping them use it better, or helping kind of work on the features that are important to them is a really common way, and probably the easiest way to get to make a living doing open source. But I will say you're at that point, you're not really kind of, depending on how you do it, you're not really getting paid to work on open source. You're getting paid to do contracting, and then you're sort of using that money to subsidize the time you spend on open source.
Yeah.
So it works, but it's not really what I envisioned for kind of like a funding model for open source. I envisioned you'd get paid directly for working on open source. But it is great. The Brave team is amazing, and they integrated WebTorrent into their browser. And so they were basically paying me to help with things that came up. And I wrote the first, and maybe I think definitely the first version, and then kind of worked on the second version of that integration into Brave. So
talk to me about like what WebTorrent did for you from a confidence perspective. I mean, I have to imagine, as that's gaining steam, you're building a lot of confidence and, just your reputation in the community, but then, your ability to really take this to another level with a new business down the line.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been interested I always thought, like, wouldn't it be cool to be one of those open source people, even back when I was just learning how to code? Because it seemed like whenever you were following a guide in a book, programming book or whatever, and you're trying to kind of get started, one of the first things you'd always do is install a bunch of open source. And I always thought, like, okay, it seems like it's this magic thing that, some people have the ability to make this, open source code that powers all the crappy code that I write. It's like this thing that it's the secret sauce behind everything. And I always thought it'd be cool to be one of those people. And then with WebTorrent, I was like, okay, let's try to do this hard thing that no one's done before. It's a sort of a surprising, it's similar to the hackathon kind of mentality I mentioned earlier. It's like a surprising thing. People don't think you should be able to do that in a web browser. And I just jumped into it. And then before I knew it, I was like, oh, I'm one of those open source people now, that I looked up to before. And it just kind of happened before I knew it, yeah, I just was like putting stuff out there. And a lot of it was bad at first, just publishing packages that were probably bad ideas, and then eventually made some good ones too. And then, yeah, you're right. I mean, seeing that people cared about it, they wanted to like invite me to give a talk on it and stuff like that was a huge boost to the confidence. And then you kind of then realize like, oh, it almost guides you with like, okay, if other people think this is interesting, that I might not be crazy that, to keep working on it, even beyond, when maybe should have, like, I might have moved on if I didn't have any kind of encouragement from people to work on it for all those years. Right. And then you just learn other things along the way too. I mean, you learn like, okay, how to manage a community of people, like how do you keep everybody motivated? Because the contributors to the project are not getting paid, right? I mean, I wasn't getting paid. The contributors aren't getting paid. So how do you get people excited about something when there's no monetary incentive? How do you market it? Like, how do you kind of like talk about it to people, get them, get others excited about what you're doing? How do you, even just like writing the website copy for a project? It's almost like being a mini founder when you're writing a project, which is kind of cool.
Yeah. What were some of those ways of keeping folks engaged? Because, I've tracked folks that have contributed on GitHub, and, we actually had an idea of launching this was right when the pandemic hit, of, projects that needed support, from other developers, and, without offering cash or incentives, we were struggling just to, trying to align based on like, almost like a value system of like, oh, this thing is helping to do this thing in the world, so you'll want to contribute. How did you find it encouraging to grab folks' attention and keep them engaged for longer than a week or two before they're like, on to the next thing?
Honestly, I don't know what I did. It kind of just happened that, I don't know, the problem was interesting. Maybe the way I talked about it was cool, and people were like excited by,
because you're not running like weekly stand-ups or anything, right? It's not like you're having like consistent gatherings on a weekly basis like you would if you were on a dev team internally at a company.
Yeah. And in hindsight, we probably should have done weekly calls with everybody, because there were people who I worked with on WebTorrent who I worked with for years, and I didn't even know
Never knew
anything about them. I didn't like, it was just all code. The code spoke for itself,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
which is kind of beautiful in a way. Like, everyone just shows up with code, and code is the unit of, like discussion and idea exchange.
Right.
Obviously GitHub issues as well, but yeah. And then like later on, I was like, oh, I should probably like, I don't know when it struck me. I was like, I should learn who these people are. I'd only met, I think, like one of the contributors in person before. And then I called I emailed a few of them and said, hey, can we do a call to meet them finally? And it turned out they were awesome. And I was like, cool. I should have like been doing a monthly call with everybody earlier. But just didn't think of it. I don't know. Yeah. It's funny how that works.
Honestly, running communities are really challenging. I think it's an area that is constantly, an area to iterate on, because it's all about people and keeping people engaged. And at the end of the day, time is extremely, valuable currency. And if you're going to, have me spend time with you, what's in it for me type of thing, you have to figure out what is that value that they get. If it's not compensation, what is it that's going to keep them coming back? It's something that we have always struggled with to run forums, right? Like, you need to really have some sort of substance in there to keep folks engaged, and it's a full-time job, right? So it's an interesting topic in itself, one for a future episode. But just in the essence of time, I want to make sure that we find this leeway into how Socket comes about, and so talk to me a little bit more about this interest in the security side of things. Like what was it that you were starting to recognize throughout the open source community that led you down the path that these supply chain attacks are becoming more and more prevalent?
Yeah. So I was, like I mentioned, I was really involved in NPM, and at one point I was on the board of the Node Foundation. So I got a front row seat to like a lot of the growth in the usage of open source within companies. And that's really where I saw that there was a lot of risk that companies were taking on in the way they're using open source for a bunch of reasons. But one reason is just the amount of open source had massively increased. And then also the complexity of it, the way that it's written. We went from a world where you might build an app using 20 dependencies to now a world where you build an app with, it's common to see 1,000 or even 10,000 dependencies. So that means, and then that means that there's just a lot more different people you're depending on, and there's a lot more ways things can go wrong, a lot more ways vulnerabilities can get introduced into your app, or even that those packages could get compromised and be used as like a vector into your application. So that's when I also started like looking around at kind of the tooling that was available, and it looked like it just was too cumbersome and not developer friendly enough to really work. And it was also falling down and breaking because of the change in the amount of open source. A lot of this tooling was developed 20 years ago or 10 years ago, and just didn't anticipate the amount of open source that we'd be using today. So when you put it all together, right, open source code is 90% of the lines of code in modern applications, and you have developers not really reviewing that code, right, because it's too much code. And the whole point of using open source is that you're not really, you're not an expert in that area, so you're grabbing a package or a dependency to sort of make that problem go away for you. So you have that sort of like there's no visibility into what's in there, and people are just grabbing code that they find online. And then you have the tooling isn't really up for the task of like, really proactively and preventatively, like looking for problems in that open source code. So you end up with this like perfect storm where we started seeing a ton of malware and financially motivated attacks that all the traditional scanning tools in the space were not able to detect. And it was affecting all kinds of organizations, not just the big ones, but even small ones, because when a popular package is compromised, it's used by everybody. So it affects, even if you're not the target, it could potentially affect you. And so we started seeing like a lot of high profile incidents. including probably the biggest one we've ever seen last year, which is this thing called the XZ backdoor, which would have probably been the largest supply chain attack ever, that targeted Linux and the SSH part of Linux, which would have meant that basically the attackers could have gotten into any server that they wanted to by just basically having a secret skeleton key into any server. So it would have been like maybe the end of the world. I don't want to exaggerate too much here, but it would have been catastrophic, like
Wow.
if it actually had gone out. But fortunately,
I read about this one actually, and I thought it was very creative. How it was like this long, planned out attack where multiple adversaries were a part of this. Like the good cop, bad cop scenario was really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. They actually talked to the maintainer and kind of convinced him to give them access just through a course of like breaking him down. And like you said, one guy negged him, one guy gave him positivity, and he just it eventually
real deep psychological attack on this poor owner.
Yeah. So and then when you see things like that, it makes you realize. So we're I'm glad the community caught that before it was an issue, but the way we caught it was totally accidental, and it makes you realize there's no systematic way that the companies are actually able to protect themselves from these attacks. It's really mostly just hoping for the best, and that's not really a security strategy. So that's when once I understood that immense influence that a single open source attack could have on the security of basically every application that powers the whole modern world, then I wanted to try to do something about it. And Socket was a humble attempt to do that with taking a new approach and trying to fill that gap.
And you started Socket, was it in the pandemic?
Yeah, it was during 2020. Although then we pivoted, we were doing something else then, but very quickly after, early-ish in 2021 was when we really started.
I'm always curious how you come to partnerships with co-founders. How did you assemble your founding team?
So I actually don't have any co-founders. It's just me.
Oh, interesting. Nice.
Yeah. So I wanted to potentially have a co-founder, but the bar was super high for who I wanted to work with at that level. And the kind of my main person I wanted to work with had just finished doing a startup and needed to take a year off to just go into the forest and do some soul searching. And so I decided, all right, I'll just do it alone.
It sounds like one of those Indeed.com commercials where it's like, your sound engineer is leaving and going to find himself. Cool. Well, let's dive into Socket then. Give us the quick pitch and what are those key problems that you were solving with Socket?
Yeah, so we're a developer first security platform, and we help companies protect their applications from software supply chain attacks and other types of threats, including like vulnerabilities and really just the whole gamut of different threats. And what we do best is we empower developers and security teams to safely use open source code by very preventatively and kind of proactively detecting and blocking the worst attacks. And then what we do really differently than others is we deeply analyze the actual behavior of the open source code. And so that lets us go kind of way beyond what the other tools can do in terms of finding threats and then providing kind of comprehensive protection. So there's a whole space of tools that already exists. It's like $1 billion industry, and we're just coming in and saying, okay, we can do all the stuff they do, but also all this other stuff that's important and much deeper as well. And so it's just a better offering. It's a better solution. And we're starting to see like a lot of the top companies adopting Socket and switching off of other kind of legacy tools.
And I want to make sure that our audience kind of knows this difference between security vulnerabilities and supply chain attacks, because there's a key difference there. Can you expand on that just to so they know the side that you're on is more around the supply chain attack side?
Yeah. Well, so we do vulnerabilities too, but yeah, let me kind of break it down. And so the way to think about it is a vulnerability in software is really like it's a bug, right? It's a mistake that a developer made that kind of created a flaw in the software. And a malicious attack or a supply chain attack is something where there was an intent there. There was an intent to create bad behavior, or something that's going to steal your data or attack you. And so they're different because one's an accident and one's intentional. And so the way that plays out is, if you think about when you're using software, when you have developers at your company that are grabbing open source code from the internet and using it to build applications, there's always going to be flaws, accidental vulnerabilities that are in that code. And they're not intentional. They're just mistakes that were made. And the way to kind of address those is to keep your software up to date and just kind of always be updating, so that you're eventually, when they find those flaws and they fix them, that you're going to be on the latest version and you're going to be able to get those fixes. But when it comes to the second kind, the kind of intentional attacks, those you really you can't really wait around for the community to kind of identify those and address them, because what you're dealing with is you update your software and that is how you are attacked. Like you're installing a new version, and that new version has bad code in it that's going to attack you. And so it could be that the code is even put in there by the person who created the software, which happens sometimes. There's been many examples actually of open source maintainers themselves deciding to sabotage their own code for various reasons, whether it's political or financial gain, or maybe their laptop was hacked and someone used it. So there's a lot of reasons why you can't just blindly update to a new version and trust that it's going to be correct and safe. And so that's where the difference is really key, because with a vulnerability, it's a potential for an attack, and so you can kind of wait around. You don't have to fix it necessarily immediately. But with a supply chain attack, you need to actually be able to know something's safe proactively before you use it. And that's kind of where the existing tools, they don't have any answer for how to do that. They just literally, some of them just scan your what you're using once every 24 hours, which means like if a developer is going to bring something into the company that's bad, unintentionally or intentionally, you're going to find out about it, maybe 24 hours later. And at that point, who knows what havoc it's already wreaked on your systems, what data it's stolen, and all that. So you'd almost think of us as like a antivirus, for open source.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds exhausting. How do you kind of stay motivated? Because, there's so much out there. What is it that kind of keeps you, motivated to, kind of continue to this overarching mission of like securing the open source ecosystem?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one is I love open source, so I don't want it to be affected by this trust issue. I think if people can't trust open source because there's all these attacks happening constantly, then they're going to use less open source, which is going to mean that we go back to the bad old days when everybody wrote everything custom for their own company. And, we lose a lot of the benefits of building on top of this shared foundation and being able to kind of move fast as an industry. So it'll just be bad for, just kind of efficiency and just the health of open source. And the other reason is I think it's just fun to, if you think about it, when you engineer a bridge, right, what you're going to face. You're going to face earthquakes, maybe, you know how gravity works. No one's changing the rules of gravity on you. They're set in stone. And so you can kind of engineer it to the conditions that are going to be imposed on the bridge. But with security, you have an attacker, you have an adversary that's evolving and changing. So you can't really, rest on your laurels and just assume, okay, this is safe forever. And so you have this kind of cat and mouse game that's really fun, where it's always changing. The threats are always evolving, and you always have to stay on your toes. And so it's just a lot more, kind of more interesting than more static fields, in my opinion.
What would you describe as the future of Socket? What does Socket look like down the line, 5 years out?
Yeah, well, we're going to keep growing as a company. We have, like I mentioned before, some amazing customers, including just big companies like Anthropic and Figma, and there's a whole bunch of others on our website that you can see. We're going to keep growing in terms of customers. We're going to grow the team because we have a lot of ambitious goals for what we want to do, including, first of all, just kind of expanding to cover more and more different open source ecosystems, so different programming languages, but also other parts of AppSec. So, there's like also a lack of innovation in a lot of other areas too. And I think our team has really good ideas, and we'll have some interesting stuff to announce soon, hopefully on that front.
Cool. I just want some quick hits on the company. So headcount, funding, location. Is it in person? Are you distributed?
Yeah. So we're about 35 employees, which is pretty small for how much kind of revenue we have and how much we've accomplished.
Yeah.
Philosophically, we like to hire just the best people, and we have a really high bar. I know everyone probably says that, but we intentionally have kept the team small, even though we have plenty of funding, and that's been kind of an intentional strategy. We've raised 3 rounds total. So we did a $5 million seed round, $20 million Series A, and then most recently a $40 million Series B. So we're a Series B stage. And what was your other question? I forgot.
Oh yeah, like how do you guys work? Are you in office? Are you distributed? Kind of hybrid or what?
Yeah, we're a fully remote company. We started during the pandemic, so that was kind of how we started, and we've been able to just hire some amazing people that live in all kinds of different places by being fully remote. So, we're probably going to stick with that for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, that's awesome. I guess one last question, then we'll transition into the final segment. But yeah, like what advice would you give to developers just to kind of help them better secure their projects against emerging threats?
Yeah. Well, use Socket. That's an obvious one.
That was the point of that question.
Yeah, no, but seriously, like I think just caring a little bit more about where your open source code comes from can go a long way. Socket can help with that. If you install us, it takes 2 clicks to do an install of Socket. It's the easiest security tool or developer tool you've ever used in terms of like getting started. It's you click install and then you click all repos, and then it'll go out and protect all your GitHub repos, or if you're using another platform, you can do it on that as well. And basically, just like that, we're going to be now looking at every single commit, every single PR, scanning it, and proactively intervening whenever there's a risk. So if you're making a mistake in a PR, bringing in something that's unsafe, Socket will go right in line there and tell you, hey, wait a minute, you shouldn't do that. You should think twice. And then if you configure it, we can even block it for you and just stop it from kind of affecting you. So it's really, really easy to do that. And I would say if you're not, and there's a really generous free plan too. So there's no reason why people shouldn't be using this. It's free to get started. And for teams that are under 25, you can just get started right away. And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it's a no-brainer.
Cool. All right. I love it. Let's transition into this final segment. So we'll have a little fun with this one. It's called the 5-second scramble. So it's just a little bit of a rapid fire Q&A. Try to keep your answers within 5 seconds. Otherwise you'll be air horned off. And some business and some personal. You ready to rock and roll?
All right.
Well, it sounds like you've done a lot of pitches. So I'm going to tee you up with a softball here. Explain Socket to me as if I were a 5-year-old.
Protect your code from everyone else's code.
What's your favorite part about the culture at Socket?
Everyone is very optimistic and ships stuff.
What type of technologist thrives at Socket?
Low ego and someone who just does it for the love, like craftsmen. We have a lot of that.
Cool. What are some of those tech roles that you're actually hiring for today?
Staff engineer, senior engineer, and designers. So front end, back end, full stack.
Cool. What is a charity or corporate philanthropy that's near and dear to you?
Well, we sponsor some open source projects that we use, including JSPM and a few other projects. We've hired maintainers of projects that we use as well. So open source.
Nice. Briefly describe your morning routine.
Well, these days, I just got back from Japan, so I'm drinking green tea every morning, and it's a lot smoother than coffee. I love it.
Japan, amazing country, man. Good for you. If you could have dinner with any tech icon, current or past, who would it be with and why?
I think probably Elon, just because he's the most dynamic and the most interesting right now. I know people have different thoughts on his politics, but he's just a very dynamic individual. I think it's an obvious choice.
What's the worst fashion trend that you've ever followed?
Oh man. I used to wear really baggy clothes when I was in high school and college. So all the old pictures of me look like I don't know. I don't know. It's like the '90s look.
The '90s look, man. I'm a '90s kid too, so Jenko jeans were really big back in the day.
Uh-huh.
Way bigger than you needed. What's something that you love to do but you're really bad at?
I like climbing, like going to the climbing gym, but doing bouldering, but I'm not very good at it.
It's hard, man. It's exhausting on the forearms.
Yeah.
Favorite Disney character?
Probably Aladdin.
Nice. And then last one, what was your dream job as a kid?
I think it was, I mean, depending on the age, like once I was like in middle school, high school, I think it was to found a company. So this is it.
Living your dream. I love it. All right, Feross, appreciate your time, man. Thanks for hanging out with us on the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was really fun. I like the lightning round questions at the end. Those are good.
Good stuff. All right, man. Have a good one.